The Edmonton Oilers face a must-win Game 3 tonight back in Edmonton against the LA Kings to prevent going down 3-0 on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis, 1 year in as host of Locked On Oilers, my third NHL season with the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's show, we're going to walk through some big takeaways from the first two games of this series. We are going to start with the Oilers just looking skittish, not getting to their game quickly. We'll pivot to an open-ended conversation about the goaltending, which I do want to get your opinion as well. So we're going to have a poll up on the YouTube feed, and I'll post it on my Twitter and Blue Sky accounts for anybody curious and wants to see where other people are at. And then we're going to tie a bow on this episode talking about the home ice advantages, how the Oilers might be able to maximize that, and a whole lot more. So to start today's show, I want to emphasize something very clearly. These are the NHL playoffs. Weird things happen. It is not out of the realm of possibility. In fact, I would venture to say it's perfectly reasonable to expect the Oilers to make this series competitive. If you are keeping tabs on the other series around, you would think, well, the Devils are down deep against Carolina. Montreal is down deep against Washington. Toronto is holding serve and playing very well against Ottawa and has the Senators down 2-0 in their series as of the time of this recording. That game's being played right now as I am recording. So if that's out of date by the time you listen to this, I do apologize, but anything can happen. And right now, if you are trying to convince yourself how the Oilers do this, I think number one, you can acknowledge the first two games were almost as perfect storms of bad sequences and just bad luck. And I talked about it on the show after game 2 yesterday, the idea that when you're playing well, it seems that luck always breaks your way. Something good is going to happen by default almost. And when you're playing poorly, you can't get those bounces. You can't win 50-50 pucks. You flub pucks off your stick. You whiff on passes. And when it's hard, it feels like everything's going against you. You know, I've made the allusion a number of times this year to quicksand, to a riptide, to going against the grain. And when the harder you try, the more you struggle, the quicker you're going to sink in quicksand. And the harder you try and swim against the current of a riptide, the faster you're going to tire yourself out and get swept further out to sea. So it's really important that the Oilers come out in this game number 3, which, look, I am not a big must-win guy. I think that cliche gets burned out, especially by the talking heads who have to fill a 24-hour news cycle, which I understand. But this is as close to a must-win game as you're going to get in the NHL. And yes, could the Oilers come back from 3-0? Of course. It is not out of the realm of possibility, but you are asking for something the Oilers haven't done in a while. You're asking them to win 4 straight games in a row if you're asking them to come back from 3-0. So I think we're all in agreement here that it is imperative, especially if you have expectations for the Oilers to go beyond the second round, should they even manage to pull off a 2-0 comeback, that they start turning this around as quickly as possible. And it's not just in terms of the game results. And this next little spiel here, everydayers have heard for pretty much the last 2 months. They've heard since the beginning of March through April. Every individual game down the backstretch of a regular season, it can't be a referendum on the team. But your goal as a team down the stretch is to start building good habits, to start playing in a way that you feel is going to put you in a position to be successful come playoff time. And you think about where the Oilers are at and how uncomfortable they've been through the first 2 games, where the Kings have gotten out to multi-goal leads in each of the first 2 games. The Oilers special teams have let them down tremendously. At 5-on-5, the series is 7-5 on goals. Now, 7-5 to a Kings team that doesn't score a lot sounds a little worse than it is, but 7-5 in 5-on-5 goals, that's workable. That tells me you're close. The problem is that at special teams, this series has not been close, and that is the deciding factor. You've heard Chris Knobloch say it. You heard me say it on the show yesterday. It is outright imperative that the Oilers both get their power play going and find a way to get their penalty kill to a passable degree. They don't need their penalty kill to be 96% like it was in last year's playoffs, where they killed off 83 out of 87, something ridiculous like that. But the Oilers are going to need passable play. And right now, through these first two games, the Oilers have felt like in the non-McDavid Draisaitl minutes, they are purely hanging on for dear life. You know, they got their fingernails up on the cliff and they're trying to pull themselves back up. And when Connor and Leon are out there, they're making progress and getting back up. You know, you think about a quick time event in a video game where you got to mash a single button over and over again to try and make progress. That's what happens when Connor and Leon are out there together. You're making progress at pulling yourself up back over that hill. When they're not out there, you're falling back down that hill. That's gravity pulling you back down, because when the Oilers load up that super line, and I understand why Chris Knobloch is going to that line. He knows they need to score, and that is his best combination of guys. And his logic is, I need something to get us going. And if we can score just one, just two, and give us some breathing room, then I can start to play a little more tactile. But right now, I know my defense isn't helping me. I know my goaltending isn't helping me. So I need to do whatever I can to get as much offense as humanly possible. And us having one elite line is better than us having two good lines and then two mediocre or bad lines. I'd rather have the one elite line than two okay to good lines and then two okay to bad lines. And that's the calculus Chris Knobloch has made. And a byproduct of that is that in the non-McDavid Draisaitl tandem minutes, the Oilers are on their heels. Their defensemen are getting hemmed in their own zone for extended periods of time, because Connor and Leon are really the two best forwards as far as transition play, as far as breaking the puck out of their own end and receiving that first pass to build some momentum in transition to start going towards offense. When they're not out there, it is significantly harder for the Oilers to break out. You also have to account for the fact that Evan Bouchard plays a majority of his minutes with those guys, and Evan Bouchard is their best transition defenseman as well. I do think there's an argument to be made. You might want to go with Wallman and Nurse. You want to go, with Wallman and Nurse, and Evan Bouchard and Brett Kulak, or Evan Bouchard and Jake Wallman and Brett Kulak and Darnell Nurse. Because right now, these first two pairs, they just haven't gelled well through two games. And as willing as Chris Knobloch's been to juggle up the forward lines, I do think the Oilers could stand to benefit from changing up their defensive pairs. The last thought in this opening segment, and you've heard me say this a lot this season if you're an everyday listener, it's a cliche. And I know the Bill Belichick tree has not gone on to great things in other realms of football, but the Patriots hammering "do your job" into guys' skulls for 20 years, it's really important, because you look at how game 2 fell apart. Well, Darnell Nurse wasn't doing his job. He was trying to do someone else's job. He was in and around the net front for some reason. He was covering someone that wasn't his man on another LA goal. And when you start trying to do too much because you feel pressure, not only are you hurting yourself, you're also hurting your teammates. So it's really important that the Oilers play their game and everyone does their job. We are going to take our first break, and when we return, we will have the goaltending conversation on today's edition, Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Did you know your Amazon Fire TV also doubles as an Xbox? You can turn any TV into a gaming and entertainment hub with a Fire TV Stick 4K device, no console required. Grab a paired controller and subscribe or sign in to an Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included account, and you're ready to go. Dive into hundreds of premium titles like EA Sports College Football 25, which, hand up, I played the most of any video game in the calendar year of 2024. Call of Duty Black Ops 6, which got me back in on Call of Duty, which I am still playing, as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, you can watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus Max, and more. Play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of a console, or if you already have a console, the Fire TV Stick 4K device is more easy to travel with and a whole lot more simple than bringing your console with you. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers ahead of Game 3 of the first round of the Stanley Cup playoff series between the Edmonton Oilers and the LA Kings. And look, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The Oilers knew what their goaltending situation was back in August. And I have done 5, maybe as many as 10 episodes over the course of the regular season, just talking about the Oilers goaltending specifically, because it is such an important component of this team's highs and lows. And right now, it really feels like the Oilers are just perpetually waiting for the other shoe to drop. Anytime there's a shot on goal, I wins. Anytime Stuart Skinner goes down to try and make an initial save, I live in existential fear of the rebound kicking out because I know he's not going to be able to get back in position to recover, to put himself in a position to make the recovery save on the second one. And there isn't a good answer here. And some of this is going to come down to people management. And I do want you to keep that in mind as we have this conversation. After 2 games, if you want to go to Calvin Pickard, and I think that's perfectly reasonable as a listener of the show, I think if Chris Knobloch wants to start Calvin Pickard on Friday night, I understand it. I don't necessarily think I'd agree, and I will explain, but I do understand. And that's all I can ever ask for from a GM, a coach, an owner. I don't necessarily need to agree with you, but I do need to understand the logic. I do need to understand what you are trying to do. Because if you can at least put together a plan that's coherent and logic-based, then I know you're at least acting in good faith. I know you're being a rational decision maker. Now, as for why I'm a little hesitant on pulling the plug with Stuart Skinner, I, as a sports person, love to make cross-sport comparisons. I love to think about hockey in terms of football, football in terms of basketball, and all the different cross permutations. And an example I have as far as the Calvin Pickard, Stuart Skinner situation, and this is not a perfect one-to-one scenario, but if you were familiar with the New York Jets quarterback situation 2 years ago, the year Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles like the 4th play of the season, the Jets went to Zach Wilson, who was not expected to be their starter. In our comparison here, Stuart Skinner is Zach Wilson. On that team, the Jets also had Mike White, who had been a backup for a number of years, who's had moments as an NFL starter. You set the record for most passing yards and in relief, if I remember correctly, on Halloween in 2021. And there was a massive clamoring from the Jet fan base because they felt what they could get out of Zach Wilson. They knew he was too limited, and they knew the team around him was too good to be wasted on a guy trying to figure it out, because you need to be able to strike when the iron is hot. As far as the cost effectiveness of your roster, you would be better off trying to go with Mike White in the hopes that he might be able to capture some of that magic, manage the game a little bit, and then try and win the games for you and have your defense do a majority of the work. And the Jets ultimately ended up benching Zach Wilson during the course of that season. They went to Tim Boyle at one point. They went to a third quarterback whose name is escaping me at this moment, other than Zach Wilson and Tim Boyle. But the Jets at one point wanted to go back to Zach Wilson after benching him the first time. And Wilson very much told the Jets, no, I don't want to do that. I don't think that's a good idea. I'm probably going to get hurt. I run the risk of getting hurt. I need to look out for me. I know I'm probably not going to be on this team next year. I'm probably going to be released. And the subtext of that is the Jets nuke Zach Wilson's confidence. And whether or not you think Zach Wilson is a good quarterback is irrespective of this point I'm trying to make, but that's the reason why I'd be a little weary if I were Chris Knobloch of pulling the plug on Stuart Skinner. Because if you are going to win the Stanley Cup, which seems like a long shot right now, down 2-0 in the first round, you are going to need the better of your two goalies. And in terms of raw talent and in terms of regular season statistics over the course of their respective careers, Stuart Skinner has been a better goalie. He has the capacity to get to a higher ceiling than Calvin Pickard does. And I will be hand up, Stuart Skinner has been bad this year. He has been below average. In 37 career playoff starts, Stuart Skinner is 19-17. He has an .889 save percentage, an even 3 goals against average, and he has given up 4 more goals than expected in his NHL playoff career over the course of 37 starts. If you wanted to go by NHL league average goaltending this past season, league average save percentage was .893, so 0.04 lower than league average. And the real galling part and frustrating part of this, if you're an Oilers fan, the Oilers don't need great goaltending. They don't. They are not built in a way that they need all-world goaltending. They need league average goaltending. And right now, Stuart Skinner is incapable of giving them that. Do I think Calvin Pickard can do that for 1 or 2 games? Yes, absolutely. You saw it happen last year in the Canucks series. There is a path to him being a serviceable spot starter to give yourself an opportunity to reset. But I worry about when would you go back to Skinner? Can you go back to Skinner? And then the other part of that is if Pickard eventually falters, which you would expect him to, because again, he's not a starting goalie in the NHL, how do you go back to Stuart Skinner and be like, hey, Stu, we need you ready to go again? And that's why I brought up the people management aspect of this and why I told you the 2-minute anecdote about Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, Mike White, Aaron Rodgers, and I can't remember the 4th quarterback who was on that team. That was also terrible. But that's kind of the vibe I'm getting right now from the Oilers goaltending situation. I doubt they would look to Olivier Rodrigue to come in at any point. I feel like that would be asking way too much of him for somebody who just doesn't have the experience. And this is what the Oilers are in net. And they tactically and consciously chose to say, we would rather add Trent Frederick to our team. We're not going to add a goalie because we don't think the difference between John Gibson and Stuart Skinner is big enough to justify paying that salary for the next 3 seasons. And we don't want to roll the dice on Alex Georgiev, or we don't want to roll the dice on Vitek Vanacek. And now you sit here and you are looking down the barrel of 2-0 with 2 goalies who inspire zero confidence, who don't have track records of meaningful success, and you need a goalie that's going to make a play. And again, you don't need elite goaltending. The motto of this show in the playoffs last year was, can Stuart Skinner be a guy? Not the guy, not the driving force. Can he be a contributor? Can he help you win? That's all the Oilers need out of their goaltender. And if you think Calvin Pickard is more likely to help you win as opposed to hurt your chances of winning, you have to make that decision. If I had to make a decision, me personally, I would probably go with Skinner for game 3. But if the Oilers go with Pickard, I totally get it. It's justifiable. It's perfectly reasonable. I just probably wouldn't do it because of what it means going forward. And again, if you disagree with me, I understand. If you think you would rather try and worry about right now as opposed to, games 5, 6, 7 of this series, you have every right to do that. I agree with you. I get exactly where you're coming from. But I would like to see the Oilers find a way to get a better result out of Skinner, because if the Oilers are going to win a Stanley Cup, it's likely going to be with Stuart Skinner in net, which I know is a crazy sentence. I know that's a crazy sentence, especially where we're sitting right now. But Calvin Pickard just hasn't been an NHL starter on a good team, basically ever, at any point in his career. I mean, prior to game 2, his only previous playoff experience were the 2 games he played against the Canucks last year. So this is not somebody who has a lot of big game experience, and I do worry about that. But We are going to take one final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about how the Oilers can maximize home ice advantage in games 3 and 4. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers. We've got your team covered every day. The Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you have never been to a live NHL playoff game, it's unlike anything else. The intensity, speed, and energy, it's all next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. Game Time is the fastest way to grab playoff tickets, even for those must-see matchups. Prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you can save as much as 60%. What I love about Game Time is the last-minute deals where you can save as much as 60% off if you're willing to wait till the last minute. They're all in pricing that shows the total cost up front, so there are no surprise fees at checkout. My personal favorite, the panoramic seat view, so you know exactly what view you're getting of the game before you buy. And with Game Time ticket coverage, you are protected with cancellation protection, job loss assurance, or their 24-hour guarantee. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers ahead of Game 3 of the first round of the Stanley Cup playoff series between the LA Kings and the Edmonton Oilers. We will have a show for you Friday night into Saturday morning. I know we don't usually have weekend episodes, but with the playoffs on, it is imperative that we have analysis and breakdowns as soon as games go final for you guys, because ultimately, and I haven't said this in a while, and if you're new to the show, new to the program, I do want you to know this. This show doesn't work without you. Ultimately, I can't do a show every day if there isn't an audience for it. So it's really important that I serve what you guys are looking for. So with that in mind, I know I was a little doomerist in the final segment of yesterday's show. If I remember correctly, my exact words to start the third segment were, I don't have a lot for you guys right now as far as optimism, but you think about what this group is capable of, and you can start nodding to yourself. And that's all it takes to start. All it takes is one good shift. And as much as I make fun of John Tortorella now, contemporarily in 2025, when I was 12 years old, 13 years old, when John Tortorella was the coach of the Rangers, I forget if it was a press conference or in an interview, he said something along the lines of, well, when you're fighting it, when you're struggling, if all you can put together is a good shift, I'll take that. You give me a good shift, okay, we've got something there. If you can give me one good shift every 4 shifts, that's a start. Can you give me a few good shifts? If you give me a few good shifts in a row, we had a good period. If you can give me a few good periods in a row, we had a good game. You give me a few good games in a row, we have a good series. If we have a good series, we're probably going to win the series. And that's the way you got to think about it when you're in these survival situations. And I know what I had just said at the end of that second segment as far as Skinner versus Pickard and the logic for Skinner being more the long-term playoff trajectory as opposed to Pickard maybe being the right now. The Oilers need something to break right for them. They have not gotten that lucky bounce. They have not gotten that lucky call. The Oilers are taking way too many penalties. They've taken 11 penalties through these 2 games, and you're not going to win, period. And yes, do the Kings have a good power play? Yes. I think Jim Hiller deserves a lot of credit for going to a 5-forward power play unit. I think there are plenty of teams that could benefit from such an alignment. I don't necessarily think the Oilers are one, because I think Evan Bouchard has a unique enough skill set at his position that makes it worth keeping him out there in that 5-on-4 situation. But you need to take advantage of what's in front of you. So home ice advantage, number 1, last change. That means you can get Connor and Leon out there against that Quentin Byfield line, where Byfield's been out there with Fiala and with Trevor Moore. You can get them away from Danault and Kopitar as much as you can. And then You also have the advantage of coming out of TV timeouts where you get to see who the Kings send out there. You can match Connor and Leon. You also have the advantage of when you come out of a penalty kill situation, you double up, you get Connor and Leon out there again. That's an opportunity to get them out there together. I know Knobloch has done that a ton during the course of the regular season, and it's a sound strategy, frankly, to maximize their ice time. And the other component of last change is taking advantage of the periods you have the shorter change. Because you're the home team, you have the shorter changes for 2 of the 3 periods as opposed to the visiting team, which has 2. And because of that, you want to use that to your advantage as far as when you're dumping the puck in, when you're going to get it, when you're taking it in yourself, and those little things. And for the Oilers, for things to go right for them in game 3, they need to get to their game. And I talked about it a ton in the first segment. I talked about it a ton after game 2. When Connor and Leon are out there, you need them going full tilt, trying to create offense as much as you can, whether that's with Perry or with Hyman as their winger, whichever one you want, banging at the net front, trying to look for deflections, rebounds, whatever. Okay. But if you want them out there with Bush and Wallman, Bush and Nurse, whoever at the points, whatever. And everyone else's minutes, our goal needs to play as much hockey in the Kings' end as we possibly can. If that means living on the walls, playing cycle, high to low, deflections, point shots, I'll live with that. But right now, the Kings are making the Oilers play too much defense, and it's why the Oilers are taking too many penalties, and it's why they keep getting broken down. The more defensive mistakes, the more opportunities you have to play defense, the greater amount of opportunities you have to make a mistake. And that's been the Oilers' issue through these 2 games. Wholesale, it's not atrocious, but when you break it down and you over time, if you're bleeding over from 55-45 closer to 60-40, then it becomes a challenge of, well, we're hanging on for dear life here, and we just need Connor and Leon to go out there to change up the energy for 45 seconds. And then you're not getting the most out of those guys. If they're worried about, well, we just spent, 90 seconds of the last 2 minutes in our own end, and our D are tired. Let's just rim it around the boards, buy ourselves a little time in the zone just to let everyone catch their breaths. You're wasting your best players. And that's really the key here. The Oilers need to be more efficient, especially in the offensive zone. They have had far too many zone entries that haven't eventually manifested a scoring chance. They've had too many scoring chances without traffic in front, without screens in front. If you want to break down a good defensive team, you need to put those defenders in conflict. The Kings are a man-on-man team. That means you need guys circling, and you need to make those guys pass them off to each other. That's how you break down one-on-ones. If you are constantly bobbing and weaving and alternating and cycling, you're going to end up making those defenders overlap with each other, and there's going to be breakdowns eventually of, oh, you have him, I have him. The Oilers haven't been able to do that enough so far, but that will just about do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much for making today's episode your first listen of the day. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. Be sure to check out the Locked On NHL Game Night show, which is featured on the Locked On NHL feed, breaking down all of the games of the night during the Stanley Cup playoffs. That goes up after the final game of the night goes final. I will talk to you guys after game number 3. Good luck. I hope I'm talking to you with a better Oilers result. Until then, let's go Oilers.